Hi everyone. Welcome to the Untethered Mind. Today we have Aleem, who has a YouTube channel called Secular Spirit and an Instagram channel.
That's
Um,
right.
no, Instagram profile. But you also have another one as well, Leaving Islam? Or
Yes,
do you not?
yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Is there a difference between the two? Because they use the same color scheme, and that's how that's how the way
Yeah, I
they for
mean,
different purposes.
for sure. I mean, first of all, thank you so much for having me. And you've, I really appreciate how you've supported me ever since I was just leaving Islam on Twitter and
Really?
Instagram. Yeah, that's what
Oh,
I started with. I didn't do any videos. It was just text posts, basically sharing the story of why I left Islam and my journey towards finding a meaning in life after I left. And so the main difference to answer your question is that was just focused on Islam. Like 99.8% of it is just on Islam. And with Secular Spirit, which I started a few years after as a YouTube channel showing my face on videos, that's more about spirituality in general and how we try to find meaning in life, whether through organized religion or outside of it in a secular way.
yeah, I actually remember that I did. I remember I asked you to write a piece for a blog because I know you were writing and we really wanted people to also consume a bit more written media as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm a
Um,
writer. I'm a writer
yeah,
by profession. It's just I would love to just write and write and write, but especially in this day and age, video is really the best way to reach more people.
yeah, exactly. But I was just like, oh, maybe I should do some writing as well, but also like this was like ages ago. This was in 2019, maybe 2020.
I know it
Yeah.
has been that long. I think 2019 is around when I first started.
Hmm.
So it's been like almost 5 years. Wow.
Yeah, it's been a while. I have my dog just coming here for attention, like giving me his toy, and he's like, play with me.
It definitely is true that, like that whole thing about how animals, like pets, show up when you're on a Zoom call or a work call. They know you're focused on something else. And so they're trying to,
This is definitely true. Like
it
I'm
is,
working and like it's quiet and I'm like just like coding or whatnot. And then the moment I jump on a call, starts,
yeah,
bringing a toy. They're like, oh, you're alive.
yeah,
Let me
yeah.
annoy you.
This is actually a good point to mention. I don't have any pets, but I am taking care of a cat for a friend, and he's lurking around, so he may emerge at some point. Just a warning.
No worries. But today we had a very interesting topic to talk about. Um, I know we actually messaged each other coincidentally.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, they,
Almost at the same
which,
time. It was weird.
yeah, I mean, were you going to message me as well?
Yes, yes. I
Okay,
had a
cool.
I had an idea for a video, and I was going to ask you about it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, I was gonna ask you anyway because I was like, oh, I'll really have you on my list because I was making a list of like I want to interview different people, like not just ex-Muslims, but also like have you back again to like re-record.
I know
But the
because I
topic
did
we
a
had
I
in
did a video a
sorry.
long time ago on your channel, right? Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, it was early days and it's not up now, but I'm hoping that, if people find your channel, they can go into what you talk about. But today we're going to talk about some of the kind of the juicy stuff, dating,
Hmm.
but mostly from a perspective of being a Muslim and then leaving Islam and kind of zooming out on what dating looks like now as well in the Muslim world. Like a lot of it has been online. It's not like arranged. I mean, I'm sure there's arranged marriage, but it's not as traditional as well right now. I mean, there's more opportunity
There's other
available.
options and avenues. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of what led to us. So maybe we can step back a little and talk more about, your upbringing and where you are now, and then how you saw dating as you were growing.
So that's a really good question. Well, just to make the long
Well,
story short,
the correct answer is I wasn't saying dating when I was growing up as a Muslim.
well, I had thoughts about it, definitely, especially because even though I grew up in the Middle East, my background is Palestinian, but I spent most of my childhood living in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates, in the Gulf region. I did live in Canada and the UK as well for a few years, so that factored into my view on dating as well, because I kind of experienced Middle Eastern culture and Western culture as well. So what I'd start by saying is that my family wasn't very conservative. I wouldn't even say they were really fully practicing. I would say I was more of a practicing Muslim than my parents, for example. But because I was living in the Middle East, because I was living in Dubai, I went to a school that had Islamic education as part of the curriculum, and that really influenced how I viewed religion, how I viewed my life, and how I viewed dating. So, in a nutshell, how I viewed dating was that that's something that people do, but it's best saved for when you're an adult and you're seriously considering marriage. So I grew up believing that sex outside of marriage is wrong, haram, it's a sin, and that if you are dating someone, that there shouldn't be a sexual component to it whatsoever, but something that you're doing because you're considering them for marriage, like I was saying earlier. However, one thing I'll add to that is because I did spend years in Canada and the UK, and I saw how, even though I was still pretty young then, like I wasn't even 10 yet, there were kids dating, and I was in classes with girls. That was very different compared to in Dubai, where I was in a boys only school. I saw the differences, and I also had access to Western media. So, like teenage drama shows. I'm trying to think of a few examples that I used to watch as a kid. Uh, Smallville and, like the Superman teen show and things like that. I don't know why I brought up that one. It wasn't even one of my favorites.
It's just
But
like, how's that relevant?
well, I would see how young people would be dating and kissing and going out late at night with someone of the opposite sex. I'm like, whoa, this is what's going on in the Western world. Okay, so I didn't see it much in Dubai, but Dubai, relatively speaking, is a very liberal Muslim city in a Muslim country. That's more liberal compared to Saudi Arabia or Iran or Pakistan even. And so there were people I saw that were dating, and there were boys in my class that had girlfriends. And in my head, I was always torn because I thought I was intrigued by this. I wanted to experience this as well, but deep down, I knew it was wrong.
And how
So,
old were you at this point?
so when this would be like the onset of puberty. So 13, 14, 12 is when I really started thinking about all of these things. So I was of two minds. I was interested in maybe not dating specifically, but I was interested in girls.
Yeah.
And
At least you knew your sexuality.
yes,
Or
yeah, yes,
the normative sexuality.
yes, correct.
I'm not
I
going to
knew,
make any assumptions.
yeah, yeah. I knew I was interested in girls, and I knew also that it was wrong. Like, so I had those two because of my Muslim upbringing or teaching. I knew it was wrong. So there would be some incidents where, for example, I remember this one that sticks in my memory where, although I was in a boys only class or section, the school also had a girls section that was completely separate. There were even walls and fences and gates separating us. So think about that for a moment. So
No, I had that too. I had it probably worse than Dubai. Like, we were like, even the girls all had to wear a specific uniform, hijab, whether you're Muslim or not. Everybody had to wear the same.
oh yeah, much more strict than
Um,
my school then. Yeah, I
like
think
you can't
the
do your
girls had a
nails done,
choice in my school.
no earrings as well under your hijab. Not that anybody would see it, but like technically nothing. And like white socks, like everything was just like,
Wow. And where
yeah.
was this?
So
I actually don't know where you grew up.
Tanzania.
Tanzania. Okay, okay, I did know that actually.
I was there until like, yeah, until I just turned 16. So I finished high school and then I moved for pre-university.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's for another time. But when you were thinking about dating, I'm like, 13 is so young. I mean, okay, maybe we consider dating differently, but you said you were interested in women or girls, not women, they're 13. And I was a late bloomer. I feel like everything for me just started a lot later in life. Like my first ever like boyfriend I held hands with was when I was like 15, like late 15. And then yeah,
then I'm
and
a
then
much later bloomer than you. I guess we'll get to this a little bit later, but I
ooh,
don't think I
okay.
I don't think I the first time I kissed a girl was probably not until I was 18,
Okay.
around then. But yeah, oh, I just wanted to quickly mention that memory I had.
Mm,
So I had my Islamic education teachers were very influential people in my life, and the one I had for secondary school, so grades, I think grade 7 and onward. His name was Mr. Muhammad, because my school we called our teacher by their first name, which some people here in Canada, where I am, find weird. But anyway, I was walking by the girls section of my school, and I think a couple girls started talking to me. And the moment the conversation started, I just hear a voice screaming, "What are you doing?" And then I turn and look around, and I see Mr. Muhammad watching me and telling me to move on. And I was like, "Oh no, I was caught. I was caught fraternizing with the opposite sex. Oh no." Like, I remember that's how I framed it in my mind. And so, long story short on this part, I definitely had the desire, but I felt guilty about it and really didn't pursue it because I thought this is something that's meant for adulthood and for marriage.
yeah, I was just gonna say, you know how you talked about like you only consider like as a Muslim you would only consider dating or you thought about dating as only when you were serious and then yeah and even if you did date no sexual relationships, did you also feel like that is or in your mind did you also feel like that was actually a pure form of dating because they're not interested in just your body or your vice
Yeah,
versa, they're interested in your mind, or like the hijabis would say like, you know, my partner will see me for my personality that will shine through, apparently.
I think
Did you
so.
also
Yeah.
feel that way?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna praise Islam here necessarily, but I think it is demonized a lot for objectifying women, which definitely is true in a sense. But in another
Mm.
sense, I remember as a Muslim thinking it, uh, your relationship with a woman shouldn't just be about sex. It shouldn't just be about objectifying her. You have to treat her with respect. You have to treat her like a partner. Obviously, with then you get into the gender roles of the man being in charge and all that. Uh, but
But
yeah,
isn't that like a primary in every culture in general?
it seems
Or
to
not
be.
every
Yeah,
culture, in most cultures.
most. Yeah.
It's just that other cultures can wear it off, can wear off, or are up to scrutiny than others.
Oh, definitely true. Yeah, but especially when I was living in the Muslim world, it was just a given. I think a little bit of a difference for me too, as well, was like how I mentioned my parents were not very religious and not very practicing. I grew up in a household where my mother and father were really equal partners in
Mm.
every sense of the word. So they both made decisions, financial decisions together as partners. They both worked.
Your
Um,
parents would adopt me. Right.
uh, I do credit them really with shaping the kind of person I am. So yeah, I do value that a lot, and I think that really shaped maybe the erroneous image I had of Islam. Because there's always this element of, well, we're a Muslim family, so other Muslim families are like this, and like seeing my mother like working and being like a respected person in my community as well. But that's, as we both know very well, that's not often the case, especially in the
Yeah,
Muslim world.
I definitely feel like I kind of got very, very lucky with my family as well. Just having the relationship we do. I mean, my parents were not equals, but there were certain gender roles. They weren't very harsh. My dad was a part-time chef, so he cooked every now and then. But my mom taught him. So it was like complicated.
Hmm.
But I had never, like in general, I faced more scrutiny even talking to a boy than my brother ever faced flirting with other girls and multiple girls. And I'm like, fucking whore. But it was always, but in his mind, it was also like very like non-sexual as well. So he got married quite young. So when he did actually, like, so when he was serious, he got married when he was like 20, 21. So he never for him dating was very different, and for me dating was like very different as well, because I grew up mostly like outside Tanzania and like in the world where I was free. But even then, like everything else, like losing my virginity happened when I was like 22, 23. So it's all quite later on, because I was still like a goody two shoes, never drank alcohol until I was 25. But it was all like, Tanzania just feels like a part of my life, but my growth actually happened a lot later. But there was so much of what I was carrying, how I would see people. The one thing I did disagree with, like very, very heavily, was gender roles being one, but the segregation between men and women. Like
Oh,
I
definitely.
know a lot of people, like even in the West, maybe some people would agree to a certain to say men and women cannot be friends. But I was like, no, we can. Right? You might be attracted to someone, you might not be attracted to someone, but you have the possibility of control. So that was like one thing that, like, and despite being like no sex, no relationship or anything, it was more around, the boys are still my friend. I was in engineering, so they were all I knew. That was something that I took on. But I wanted to kind of go back to that being told no. Like, what are you doing? Was that out of like you actually talking to the girls?
I was
Like your
actually talking to them.
teacher?
Yeah.
So what did that feel like in your mind? Like
I felt embarrassed because I knew he was right, like in my own mind. But at the same time, there was this part of me that wanted to rebel and say, "Well, I just want to have a conversation. Like, what's so bad about that?" I mean, I knew that there were other boys that had conversations with girls and that had girlfriends, like I was mentioning, and I was thinking, well, why can't I have that too? But then there's that guilt and embarrassment of knowing, even though other people are doing it, that doesn't make it right. So like I was saying before, I was really kind of caught between two places when it came to that stuff. But because I was like a pretty compliant child and I wanted to make sure I did the right thing, because at this point I also had the fear of hell that's ingrained into a lot of Muslim children, I didn't want to risk it. So even though I was embarrassed, he's right. The embarrassment came from me thinking that my teacher was totally right and I was wrong for doing that, for talking to the girls.
And as you were, so how old? So you were like 13, 14 at the time?
Yeah, around that. Yeah.
And then as you were growing up, you said holding hands came a lot later to you as well. So what was that journey like? And I have a few questions after you respond to that. So how did you end up from like, oh my God, this is wrong, to holding a hand, like, someone's hand?
Holding someone's hand. How dare I?
Such a specific question.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
what did you do?
Well, I think the main thing that changed was when I finished secondary school and graduated. The plan was always for me to then move to Canada, return to Canada for university. That's what my parents had in mind for me. So moving to Canada, I was 17 at the time, was like a major change in my life. And can you imagine growing up in a Muslim country and then being in a Western country, especially at that age, all alone for the first time in my life, and I was in
Oh, I can.
a co-ed residence.
I can.
So,
That was me. I was 16 when I left home.
oh,
And
there you go. You're even
I
younger.
grew up in Tanzania. Escalators were new.
Yeah,
Escalators. Not even
I will
like,
say that. So Dubai was pretty westernized in a lot of ways. So it wasn't as shocking of a
I
cultural
had
shift as I
never
think it was
used
for
a
you.
bank card. I'd never used a bank card or like have when the electricity went. And I'm like, once like our building had like a power failure, and I'm like, oh, it's like Tanzania. This was my everyday.
Oh wow.
No electricity, oh, no water, and I'm like, oh, and I wasn't even from like a poor area, so like, yeah, I can imagine like being around a lot of the
Wow.
people. So I was like, everything was new to me, and that was Malaysia. But in Malaysia is still more modern than UAE at this point. Because I was in like a
Wow.
student area in Malaysia, so I was like, there's a supermarket, like there's like a big supermarket. I was excited by supermarkets. That's where like it wasn't like I'd never been to like a proper good supermarket. We had it at the time, but they were rare and expensive and imported goods, and we couldn't afford it. And then I go to this whole new place, and I'm like, oh my God, there are trains. I've never taken public transport in my life.
So it's
So I
safe to
was,
say there was a lot of stuff attracting your attention beyond just dating at that point as well.
yeah, everything was just like, oh, this is new. There's a woman who's not wearing a hijab and she goes to pray. That is new. Like that, I was shocked. But sorry,
Well,
back to you. I just feel like, yeah, I can imagine like a lot of things,
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
especially
yeah.
being alone is,
Being
it's like, okay.
alone, and I think the key thing was, so yeah, I was in a university residence, co-ed shared bathroom, free mixing, intermingling with women, guys and girls mingling together, and I think what happened at that point was, and I've heard other immigrants talk about this, is when you leave your familiar home, your familiar environment, and you go to a new one, you inevitably end up to a certain extent questioning all the things that you took for granted. And I remember thinking, why am I even here? I was pursuing a degree I wasn't really interested in. I didn't really want to go to university. It's just the next thing you have to do, right? Uh, Especially according to my parents and many parents. Uh,
No, mine was the opposite. I fought my
okay,
way.
okay. Oh, wow.
I fought my parents were like, oh, you're just gonna stay here. I was like, I'm gonna kill myself. I just swallowed 20 pills. And I'm like, you're sending me to study.
Wow, so the complete
But
opposite.
I had to fight. No, I had to fight. I mean, they weren't like, we're not going to send you. My dad held on to this guilt that I'm never going to stop you from studying. And then I'm like, okay, college. And I'm like, okay, can you pay for my bachelor's as well? And then can you pay for my master's as well? And it was just like, hello, when are you going to get married? Or like, what are these degrees achieving? Because they never went to university. My
Hmm.
parents had never studied beyond high school. So I was
Oh,
the
wow.
first one who did. And so I had to fight my way through all of it. So I had a lot of firsts in my family. And it was more like, it was until I got employed by Google, and then I was flying business class with work. And my parents are like, oh, this is what a degree gets you. And I'm like, hello?
It's tough when you have to be the trailblazer within your own family, isn't it?
But also, it's like the value of education was never there because none of my older siblings did it, and they're very
Yeah.
they're very successful as well and very intelligent, but it was just not their thing, like
Yeah.
formal education. So
I try
for
not to
me,
judge people like that because they're coming from a different mindset, a different context, and it probably did seem strange and foreign to them. Like, why would our daughter want to go to college?
but it was also like a girl, and then like why would, and not just like college, it was like going abroad alone, everything that's there. But and I was 14 when I applied. I know it sounds really young. I was 14 when I started my application on my own. It was the first time I knew how to spell my legal name properly, because in Tanzania the documents were so bad, so my name was spelled differently everywhere. And I was 14 when I applied, and I'm like, oh, this is the correct spelling of my name. I didn't even know this. But it was like, for me, like that education piece was so, not education, it was the experience as well. And taking things for granted, like, doing my own laundry was something I like,
Yeah, I
so we
can remember
come from a
that.
different privilege. We come from, okay, for like in Tanzania, like I guess it's similar in Dubai, right? Like you have helpers.
We had a live-in housekeeper. Yeah,
Yeah.
which is
So
very
yeah,
normal in Dubai.
exactly. So like Tanzania, same thing. So I was like, oh, those are the things I took for granted. My mom is still like, if you didn't go abroad, you would not have to clean your own kitchen or cook. And I'm like, sorry, this is so interesting. I really like the parallels here.
Oh yeah, I mean, although in that area, complete opposite because I
I
didn't want to
know.
go. I didn't want to go to study. And in retrospect, I think it was more that I was willing to study or go to school, go to university, but I wanted to do it for a reason. I didn't want to just do it just just to do it.
What did
And
you study?
I think I started off with marketing or something. I really just picked something that was business related because I didn't know what I
Mm.
wanted to do. I think even at the time I was, like I mentioned before, I'm a professional writer. I'm also a journalist. I was interested in those things even back then, but it didn't seem like a good career option. I also love history, and studying history also didn't seem like a good career option.
I was
So
gonna say been a history teacher. I mean, you still can.
I guess I could, yeah. But yeah, I think there was like I wouldn't say pressure, but the advice from my parents was you should get something that's more of a practical degree. And in my mind, and I think this is really tied to religious thinking as well. In my mind, I thought, well, my parents know what's best for me, even though it doesn't feel right to me. I'll I'll just do it, and eventually it will work out. And I think that's really how I looked at Islam as well in my life too. So anyway, I had all of these questions about what am I doing here? And those questions led to what am I doing with life? What is the meaning of my life? What is my purpose? And that led me to questioning Islam as well as I realized.
How old are you?
So this is
You
now
don't
I'm
mind me asking?
17, 18. Oh,
Yeah, how old are you
now.
now?
Oh, I'm 35 now.
I
I'm
was
35.
like, you're very young to be in my podcast. Sorry, no under 18. Can't take that liability.
Yeah, I'm 35 now. I just turned 35 a week ago.
Oh, oh
So
wow. In Sweden, we say like they say congratulations, and I'm like, what are you congratulating me on? But happy birthday or belated birthday.
thank you very much. Thank you very much. So
So
while
you were
that was going on,
17, 18.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
while that was going on, my existential crisis of what I'm going to do with life, it inevitably led to me thinking, what is the meaning of religion in my life, and why am I not getting comfort from Islam? Because the purpose of life is to worship God, do good deeds, get into Jannah, the paradise afterwards, after you die. And part of that too, just to bring us back to the main subject, was part of it too is find a wife, have children, be a good Muslim father and
Grow the
patriarch.
ummah,
Build the ummah.
patriarch, be a
Yeah,
patriarch.
yeah. So a lot of those things kind of were questioned, and eventually that led me to leaving. I think around a year after I moved to Canada, so around when I was 18, I left. Like, it wasn't something that happened. One day I said, I am no longer a believer. There was no reverse tashahhud or something. Uh, it just kind of slowly faded away. I think I really realized, okay, I'm no longer Muslim because Ramadan came around in my second year of university, and I just didn't even bother fasting. And at that
Mm.
point, I realized, oh,
Oh
I'm
wow.
I'm just not Muslim anymore because I'm not doing anything. I'm doing
Oh
nothing Islamic.
wow. It
Yeah.
was a lot later. I was fasting up until 2016. 2017 was the first year I stopped fasting,
Oh,
and
no, it's been a
that's when I
while
did
for
a
me.
podcast.
Yeah, I think 2007 would have been the year
Oh,
that I just stopped.
wow.
Yeah.
I think for me, like because like you know how they say when girls move on from a breakup, they move on. I don't know if you've heard that. Like they
Yeah.
take a
Yeah.
long time, and it was very. I know I'm like being the classical comparing Islam to a breakup, but I think it was just how my brain had processed. It needed more time. And then when it happened, it was like it just turned. It was like there's no going back. So I think for me, I had to maintain a lot of the purity until then and carry that forward as well as I was doing it, as I was questioning it. But I did eat non-halal chicken a lot earlier because I was in Australia and it's the closest thing. And like, I'm not skinny now, but I was skinny back then, like malnutrition skinny. Like I weighed like 40 kilos or something as like a 20-year-old. So the only thing I could eat was KFC, which was next to university. So that's how my decisions were built on. But
KFC
yeah,
fuel decisions, never a good thing.
that was still like I had an issue gaining weight. Um, but so I carried on that purity culture with a lot of different things, and one of them was also dating as well. So even when I did have a boyfriend at the time, or during that time, or a different boyfriend, because there were issues of domestic violence as well. I think there was so much guilt to it as well. So when we were long distance, I felt much safer in the not sinning way. So you went to university,
Yeah.
and then you're in this co-ed living space. Were you like? I feel like I actually can't tell if you're an extrovert or an introvert.
I
You're
feel
more
like everyone.
introverted.
I feel like everyone's kind of somewhere along the spectrum, so there's a little bit of both. I would say
Yeah,
I'm
because I was
somewhere in the
gonna.
middle.
Yeah, because I was gonna say like it really depends. Like I feel like you're somebody that takes time to warm up, and then when you're fine, you're comfortable.
Yeah. I
Um,
think you might be right about that. Yeah.
so now I'm trying to imagine like an 18-year-old you kind of keeping to themselves. Um, you might go cook at the kitchen, which is, and then you're like, bye, I'm gonna go to my room. And then it took a while for you to break out of it. It's like I'm guessing your story, but like, what was it?
Well, the first thing to mention too about that was I had a Muslim roommate in my
Mm.
first year of university. He was Pakistani, I think, and he, while I was questioning my faith, he was going around saying, "Oh yeah, I'm Muslim and Muslim," but I think he had multiple girlfriends. He would go out to clubs. He would drink alcohol as well. And I was thinking, okay, so this guy's someone who goes around bragging about how he's Muslim. And up until that point, I hadn't really experienced seeing other Muslims being very hypocritical about their faith, or very pick and choosy about what they practice or didn't practice. I did, like I mentioned, I did notice that some of my classmates were had girlfriends, for example, or were trying to talk to girls. But I figured, okay, we're just kids, we don't know better. But now I was looking around, like, okay, everyone around here are like they're adults, like they're 18. Some of the guys I was meeting who are also Muslim were 20, 21, and they were all doing the same thing. And it made me realize, oh, so a lot of people are having the same struggles I do with how do I balance my desires to, go out, have fun, do what other people are doing with knowing that it's wrong. And in his case, it just seemed more blatant because I wasn't doing any of those things at that point. I wasn't drinking. I wasn't
So
eating pork. I
interesting.
wasn't dating.
It's
Yeah,
so
yeah,
interesting because I had friends like that who completely ostracized me, by the way, when I left Islam. And they were the ones dating, got pregnant, went through an abortion. And I was like, I've never even had sex. Like, I was like, I've never had
yeah.
alcohol.
That
I've
was
never
me.
done. I was like, the purity. Oh my God. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was still like, I wasn't even that religious. Like, I mean, I was. So I guess that was like part of me, when people say you left Islam for sinning. And I'm like, I guess I left Islam a lot, so like longer than I know it for, but it was just like I was so caught up in the non-sinning part. Like even
Yes.
wearing short sleeves or anything like, shorter than long sleeves took me from 19 to maybe 23, like 4 years.
Hmm. Really.
Okay, so your roommate was Pakistani doing all of this, and you're here like, oh, and we're the same like
We're the
religion.
same faith, yeah. And I
Yeah.
remember at that point too, I wasn't. I mean, I wouldn't not talk to a girl, but I wasn't trying to talk to girls for the purpose of dating them. I wasn't flirting. I wasn't going to bars, obviously, because I wasn't drinking. And so that first year I was there, my interactions were like minimal, superficial, but at the same time, I had like that desire. And there's one thing I want to mention, and I think this is like a side effect of having this kind of mentality, and it's something that started when I was still in Dubai. Is I think this is just like a human nature thing in retrospect. When you don't give people an outlet to express their sexuality, to explore their sexuality, I think dysfunctions inevitably happen. So when we're talking about segregation in schools, I think it's really dangerous when to have children when there's this key pivotal developmental age to just be completely detached from other people. Like, I mean, women are
Oh,
half the yeah,
what a normal life should look like.
what a normal life should look like. And I mean, there are here in Canada, they do have boys only schools, they have girls only schools. But what I noticed what they do is they realize that dysfunctions can happen. So what they do is they organize a lot of uh, activities, sports or dances or whatever, all sorts of things where they kind of collaborate. So the boys' school collaborates with the girls' school. I'm not saying that that's perfect, but I think there's an appreciation there in a Western country like Canada that you really need to normalize interaction. If you're a boy with a girl with a boy, so on and so forth.
I was
And
actually looking up if Sweden had gender segregated school, but I think the last one was just closed. Maybe very, very few. But
I think yeah, just like
Australia has it, and religious like Catholic
it
school, and we
still
have
exists all over the world. It isn't a uniquely Islamic thing, but I
yeah.
think, like, I mean, the evidence
It
must.
was Chris. It was a Christian thing, though. It is a Christian thing,
Yeah,
though.
yeah, 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 for sure.
Um,
I just think that the evidence is really stacked of how it can be really dangerous, and how it manifested in my life, and definitely in a lot of boys in my school, and definitely a lot of boys all over the world, is when you take away that, you don't know how to interact with girls, first of all.
yeah.
Uh, and if for example, you're bisexual or you're gay, you it's all becomes muddled in your own mind, because you start thinking, is am I not interested in women because of, let's say you're a homosexual man, like, am I not interested in women because I've been taught that it's wrong, or is it because that's not my natural inclination? So there's all of these kinds of muddled things that happen with a lot of people in that way too. But the thing that happens is, in my case, I learned a lot about sex and interacting with women through movies, which present a distorted vision of things. Like for example, that beloved teen drama I mentioned, Smallville. It gives you a distortion, doesn't give you a reality of what it's like. And then what's even more distorted than that, and that's something that can be accessible to teenage boys who will probably not be able to resist accessing it. It rhymes
It's
with
just
corn. So
yeah.
so when you have that as well as your primary access point, then it's really, really dangerous. And I think in retrospect, I was thinking about it, like, why would a lot of boys gravitate towards that than compared to like trying to date girls or go out and find girls? It's easier. You
Mm.
can just be at your home, you can be alone. And I think it's easier to rationalize in terms of guilt and sin. Like if you're going out to a bar, you're buying alcohol, you're propositioning girls in the real world, it feels much more wrong and sinful, especially if you actually had sex in that kind of context, than you're alone in the dark, no one's watching you,
But
and
it's
you just have
also
your
like,
computer.
was it the Mormons that had this? What is that term where the friends jump on the bed? Soaking. Was it soaking?
I vaguely know what you're talking about, but I really don't know any details. You're gonna have to explain.
Okay, Mormons and
Soaking.
soaking. Was it soaking or something? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Soaking is a sexual practice of inserting the penis into the vagina, but not subsequently thrusting or ejaculating, used by the Mormons, so the LDS Church. So basically, it's it's the penetration that is a problem, right? So if your dick and the woman's vagina happen to be there and your friends jump on the bed or like you push on the bed and it goes in, you're not thrusting. So not a sin. Not a sin.
um okay, I never came across something like this when I was Muslim, but like
Neither did I. I only found out about it like 2 years ago and I was like, where have I been? Like, I
the
didn't even.
the thing about this kind of stuff is like, like, are you like trying to trick God, like, are trying to find loopholes?
Yeah, I
I
think so.
The thing I heard that reminds me of this, so I don't know if this actually happens. It's kind of like an urban legend, as far as I'm aware. Maybe there is documentation of this happening. Is the the people in countries like Saudi Arabia, the men who uh, find an escort, get a get
Mm.
a marriage license,
Oh, it
consummate.
happens in Iran.
Okay,
Muta.
okay,
Shia Muslims happens.
yeah.
Happens every time.
They
It's very
consummate the
normalized.
marriage, and then they get the divorce or the annulment.
It's a temporary marriage. So muta is mostly practiced by Shia. So my community did it, and a
Okay.
lot of people who'd get engaged to it. I mean, now it's just bringing me like not religious trauma, but it was just like the hypocrisy these people would have is like
Well,
a
even
lot
if
of
you're
people
looking
would
at it
do
from a
that.
Muslim point of view, you think you're fooling God right now? Like he's not aware what you're doing?
Well, well, technically it is a marriage. So I mean, Shias believe in it a lot.
I remember. So I first heard about this when I was still Muslim, and I remember thinking, like, you're not tricking God. Like if you're gonna, when the Book of Deeds is presented to you, that is definitely, you're gonna have a tough time convincing God or
I
whoever
had I
that
had a
that's a
lot of
good
friends
deed.
who were Sunnis in school, in high school, and I was always very curious because we were close friends, and I was always very curious about what our differences were. And I'm like, what do you not agree about Shias? And they're like, oh, you have this. And I'm like, yeah, Ali and the Caliphate, I can see the differences, and that's fine. Like, it doesn't matter. But they were like, and she was like, yeah, and Mata, I don't understand like, why do you have to do that? Like, why didn't you just get married? And I was like, I was anti-Muta at that point. I was like 14, and I'm like, I'm not a Sunni, I'm not a Shia, I'm a Muslim. I'm like finding that middle ground, the way the Quran says it. It didn't last very long. I mean, it did. I just refused to accept that we had differences. It was just like I was so invested in like the Muslim unity.
Same, yeah, yeah. So
It
I guess
was
that's
just
a
like,
side tangent, but I remember also thinking, being taught that it isn't about Shia or Sunni or whatever. It's about Islam, and these divisions don't really matter. When in practice, they did in the beginning, and they still do today.
yeah. Imagine 1,400 years later, who would have thought? Maybe they would have gone to actually unite.
Yeah,
But
I don't
yeah,
know.
sorry. So you had people like who were dating, but were also like, then you have your roommate, and then what happens? Like, when do you first, like, what was like,
Well, I think it's one of those things where even though I wasn't looking for it, I would say a university is beyond getting an education. I think the best thing a university does is it puts you in a new environment where you meet and interact with all sorts of different people that you probably wouldn't have met otherwise. So it's like a really good learning experience in terms of socializing and figuring out who you are. And if you want to just look at it in a practical way, just networking. So I just met people, and inevitably I started meeting girls who liked me and I liked them. And it really just started from there. I think the first person I kissed was a girl in one of my classes. And I also realized in retrospect, there was this girl who had a crush on me, but I was so completely in my own head with, my struggles, and also not looking for dating at that point either. I didn't realize she had a crush on me until she confessed it years later in exasperation. That's a whole side story too, perhaps.
oh wow.
Uh, but yeah, it was just from girls in my class, and once I was no longer religious, I just didn't have the guilt anymore. But I had something where I just didn't know what to do. So that was an element of it, just because I had believed my whole life that this is something that happens later. This happens later. And again, I had it in university. Well, I will find a suitable partner for marriage after university is done, and then I will buy the house, have the job, have the
That's
children.
how it works.
Yeah, that's how it works.
How's the
Nice and
house buying going?
nice.
What's going
Not
on
well,
in this
not well, not
in
well.
this economy?
Yeah, but I mean, I really had this kind of, I guess you could call it a traditional
The
mindset that these things
but it's
happen in
all
stages.
that's also the American dream, though, right?
Yeah, 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 definitely.
The
Yeah.
house, the car, the family as well. So it comes from a lot of
Just
like
just a
beyond just
Muslim
Islam.
variant
Comes
of it. Yeah.
exactly beyond Islam, Christianity, conservatism, kind of maintaining that traditional nuclear family. But there was so much negativity around all of that as well, which was that in reality, like finding the right person is not as simple as like a 50% chance.
No, no.
It's like the probability is quite low. And obviously I don't need that, there is a right person that's the right person for you at the time when you're it's right people. There are multiple right people. But then this idea that, you have to be with that one person for eternity used so heavily against women than it is against men, especially when it comes to divorce. Not even just divorce laws, but especially when it comes to divorce as well. And, divorce is being accepted a bit more in the Muslim world as compared to it was before. I mean, was it the princess in Dubai who said the three? Was it Dubai or somewhere in the
Uh,
Qatar or
it might
Doha?
have been Abu Dhabi. I think I know what
Yeah,
you're
okay.
referring to.
And she just said the three talaq, and then people were like, "Oh, you're not a man," and I'm like, this guy has literally cheated on this woman, and here we are, we're turning it back around on her. So the whole dating scene, or like the whole Islamic or like the Islamic relationship, presents in itself as like a form of purity culture, which is like, you find that one person, you settle down, and there's so much pressure on you to like having found the right person, because you see it as like, she might be the mother of my children, and if you
Exactly.
come from a more traditional background like your parents were, and I am like too much of a feminist to go like, oh, I'm going to be a housewife. So like for me, it was also like, okay, well, I need somebody who is equally as financially capable, like independent, but not patriarchal. But all of these thoughts, when they go through this young mind, they really kind of, for me, it really pushed me away from relationships as a whole. Like I was dating, but I didn't want to be in a relationship. I was like, I'd go on first dates. I'm like, cool, fun, okay, cool. And I was very averse to it as well. And I didn't realize that a lot of it came from, one, my ability to not trust people or trust the opposite, like not the opposite sex, but like just trust relationships. But also like this whole idea of like, I guess coming from an Islamic world and having to be independent and not wanting that independence being taken away. Like, a lot of times that, something maybe modern feminists highlight is that, oh, I lost my train of thought, but I think it had to do a lot with like I was so opposed to traditional values, and I still am to a certain degree. I think. But like traditional values in the sense, like the negativity, that I'd never embrace any of the positive sides of actually being in a relationship.
Yeah, I mean, it takes your focus completely away. Like, I think you said it so well. The only thing that I would add is that, in retrospect, from my experience, what's so challenging about this too is you're supposed to look for this ideal partner that you're supposed to have for life and build a family with. But the way the Islamic mindset works is it doesn't give you the opportunity to learn who you are, and especially when it comes to things like your sexuality, so you can figure out who is the right person for you to be with. So what I think happens in a lot of people's cases, and especially the ones who marry really young, is they just take this deep dive with someone when they don't really know who they are, when they don't know what they're looking for exactly, and then it's like a little bit of hope for the best, or just tough it out and grind through it and paper over the cracks, which I don't think is the ideal for a lot of people.
No, I mean, what's really interesting, and I know this is kind of diverting from our original topic, but I think they're also important as well, is that we're now living in times where people are going backwards. Western people, non-religious people are going backwards when it comes to dating, slut shaming, things like body count, whatnot. And instead of making it, an individual's choice to do what they want to do, where no harm is caused, they are putting them to a pitchfork. I mean, a lot of
Yeah.
the left is moving that way, but the right is no saint either. Like, you expect this from the right, but you also see the left as well, kind of the left as well, kind of like, elements like normalizing porn, for instance, and not knowing that that is also detrimental as well. Or at least I am very much on the side of no prostitution or porn, despite being left leaning. But I don't actually have very heavy opinions on that. I just feel like we see, but in general, we see that environment kind of going into like traditional wives. I'm a stay-at-home. The TikToker like, oh, I'm a stay-at-home girlfriend. This is what I do every day, and I'm like, that's fine. That's completely fine. But to showcase this idea of like shaming other women comes as a effect of it. Or maybe some people do make it, maybe it's not the intention of this person who is the traditional wife,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
kind of the idea that a man needs to pay, not whoever is earning more, or a man needs to be a protector and whatnot. And like in my head, I'm like, I'm so heavily opposed to it. And I almost think that it has a lot to do with growing up religious as well. Because not only are these people fetishizing what those relationship dynamics can look like, I have grown up, like, I guess not me specifically, but I've grown up in that environment where I know multiple women live that life every day. And some people are like, oh yeah, I'm comfortable. And I'm like, yes, I get it. If you're rich, you're rich. Like, it's great. But the reality is, like, in this economic situation, one person earning doesn't really help. The father also, like, patriarchy is also a downfall for men as well.
Yeah.
Like, you're not as active of a participant in your child's life
I think a
because
lot of this
you're too.
stuff came up with, I don't know if this was big news in Europe, but there was this speech by a professional NFL player. Yeah, you've heard of it, Harrison Butker. And a lot of those issues cropped up because this is someone who's speaking from a position of privilege, having a wife who stays home and takes care of the kids. That is not an option for a lot of people. So again, like this isn't like you were saying before, this isn't an exclusively Islamic thing. It's tied to Christianity, and I think to a larger extent, it's tied to this view of the world through a very controlling, regimented, conservative lens.
Yeah, exactly. And I was just thinking about this guy's speech and the way people attacked him. Not okay, but also like the way people supported him was like shocking to me because there was so much more acceptance. And maybe 5, 7 years ago, like when I was or like actually I graduated ages ago, so maybe 10 years ago, I would have probably gone like, the world is going to be more liberal and more progressive, and it's going to all be amazing, and they're going to be this liberal Muslims. And I feel like that just took a really quick U-turn, like during COVID. It kind of like all just went very, very polarized. And, this guy giving that speech has no idea what it's like for, men and women who've had to actually go through this suffering. I know a lot of men have gone through the downsides of, toxic femininity or the abuse of power that women have gone through because, men are the providers and now they're left with nothing. Sorry, now we're going back in
I
a
know.
different tangent, but
I suppose it is related, in some
yeah.
ways.
But we were talking about guilt and dating and then not knowing what to do. So when you were in this space where you were like no longer religious, how old were you? Wow, you left us on a lot. I envy people who
We
had so
each
many more years
we
than I
each
did.
have our own journey. You know what's so interesting? Brief side tangent. So I have a younger brother, and he left Islam even younger than I did, and for completely different reasons. So he was like 15 or 16 or something, and he left. I think for him, it was the problem of evil. He was just seeing stuff in the news, and he was just like, there can't be a God who's real who would allow this to happen, and he just stopped believing. It wasn't as simple
Yeah, I
for
mean,
me.
I feel like a lot of people start off with a personal experience. Like it's always the case
Yeah.
that a personal experience leads you to go like, what am I doing with my life? And then, obviously, I know many of us like look into like that one thing, and I think it's quite okay that that's a reason. Like a lot of times we're put into this corner that like you have to know everything and whatnot about this religion. But yeah, I do envy people that left a lot longer than I did because I feel like, oh my God, I spent so much time.
But it
But
made you
even
the
then,
person
like,
you are today.
yeah, I guess so. I mean, I wasn't drinking when I was 18, so never really like drank and drive or anything crazy. It was always very controlled, very strict.
Hmm.
Actually, even now, I don't drink a lot, so I would have like months that I wouldn't drink, and this year was one of them. So from January to June till midsummer, I was like no alcohol at all. And if I would get drunk like other times, I would have to mentally prepare. Like I have like a plan. I'm not alone. I'm not with friends. I'm either with my partner. I know somebody's taking me home. Like I'm safe.
Yeah.
But even but so I'm always very controlled. Like even when I started drinking, I would always have water. But like I would also fall into this pattern of guilt and shame that carries on as part of it. And I'm like, a lot of people get drunk, right? Like, and a lot of people spend a lot of money, and it's not like I don't like, because I was like, oh my God, did I spend too much on something that like this? And like, I go into a spiral. Like, what is it called? The anxiety hangover?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
Hangover anxiety. Yeah. And I go into the spiral and everything. And I was like, but I think a lot of it is also religious trauma holding me back.
Yeah, definitely. You want to hear an interesting parallel? I don't drink either. I don't drink at all. I decided to stop drinking.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, I
maybe two
decided to
years
stop
ago,
drinking.
a year ago.
So you haven't had any alcohol?
I think I had like a cocktail at some point 6 months ago or something, but like, yeah, I just avoid
Yeah,
it. Uh,
I feel
and
healthier, but
oh
it's
yeah, way
also like
healthier.
I'm not. It's also like I'm not gonna drink. But like we go out, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not
Yeah,
drinking today.
I'm the
Okay.
same way, and I think that's the thing that's the root of the guilt and the shame. It's this whole belief that religions like Islam teach us that there's a way things ought to be, the way they should be, and like this is the way the universe is. And when you're not doing it, you're kind of violating the rules of the universe, and you see it. So I wouldn't necessarily disparage everything Harrison Butker said, for example, but I would criticize when it comes from this place of this is what the universe is supposed to be. It's the
This is
gender roles
normal.
are God ordained, universe ordained, and when you look at it that way, then even something as simple as I'm going to go and ask that girl out on a date, or I'm going to kiss that girl, but you doing that is transgressing against the creator of the universe, the fabric of reality.
One woman, that woman. And I'm like, I can bet on my life it wasn't his first person. It wasn't the first person that he met. And a lot of like, the Andrew Tate plot as well. Like, people who are like, oh yeah, Islam, like I believe in, like Andrew Tate now is like, I believe in gender equality, where, women and men are not the same, but they should, gave a stupid explanation for it. And I'm like, oh, from a person who ran like a cam recorder company, like you know, getting women to earn money for him, sorry. And I feel like a lot of people like come from, and a lot of people come from this either repressed part of them or
Yeah.
this holier than thou. Like I am now better, I'm now reformed. I'm sure there are other things that I'm missing as well, which is like this, like this passive, not passive aggressive, but passive imposition of their values on you, and that this is the correct way of doing it, not a middle ground or a nuance or like a, how about we let this person figure it out.
No, there's no room for that at all. Yeah.
So I actually wanted to go on a bit more. So do you want to continue? I don't want to focus too much on your dating life if that makes it uncomfortable, but did you ever date a Muslim?
A very good question. I'm actually trying to remember now. So after I left, I definitely had a few opportunities and I just didn't pursue it. And
Hmm.
I think one of the reasons why was because I was worried that the Islam thing would be something that would separate us, that would cause problems. And so that's something that I just assumed. And so it
Hmm.
was never something that for years and years, it was never something that actually happened where I went on a couple dates and then the Muslim woman said something that I just completely disagree. I'm like trying to think of a hypothetical scenario. Like she said something very homophobic, for example. And
Hmm.
she said, well, our religion says that that's a sin. So that never happened until much more recently when I went out of a long-term relationship and I started dating again. And I dated a few Muslims, like
Hmm.
practicing Muslims. And that's when like, oh, and I just did it to try it out, see what it was like. In one instance, and this one I can talk to you a little bit about. This one instance, I didn't realize she was a practicing Muslim until we started dating for a while. And then I saw, oh, this is what I was afraid of all these years and why I avoided dating Muslims. And so we can get to that in a second. I just wanted to say is I think the biggest challenge when you're an ex-Muslim, in my experience, is especially if you're an immigrant to another country, usually the people that you can most easily connect with and have common ground with are people from your background. The problem is, so my background's Palestinian. Uh, most people from my background are religious. Most Palestinian women that I've encountered in Canada are religious to varying degrees. And when religion is so important, a fundamental part of your society, your community, your identity, when you're no longer practicing, it really makes it much more challenging to find a partner. Like you kind of automatically have to look outside of the most easily available option. And it works out for people all the time, but it does make it more challenging for sure.
I think for me, it was, I like how we're very opposite in so many ways. It's very interesting.
Do tell.
Like, I mean, there's the gender, there's the education, there is the similarity of moving away from home younger. But for me, it was, I didn't want to date anybody who was remotely, not just looks like me, but remotely like near my culture. I only had one, or like since I became an ex-Muslim, but even before then. And that was really hard to date as a Muslim and saying, hey, I'm not going to have sex. So that made things very, very difficult. I had some people who were patient. I'm like, yeah, I'm not really. But it didn't essentially work out. And, you know, for me, like long term, like I feel like Sweden is the best place I could have ever been. And I didn't realize this when I moved in. It's just 3 years when I moved. But Sweden being so non-religious, you don't have a lot of religion. Like, we were talking about the segregated school. I was like, oh my God, this is perfect. I only realized this over the last year, not the first year I moved there. But it was also that I didn't ever have to worry about the common values if the person swiped right.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
if they weren't racist, it was already like, okay, well, they're not Muslim unless I see a Muslim name, but they weren't Muslim. They're very Swedish, so most of them are quite left leaning. I think one bad experience I had on a first date was, I like, obviously after Tanzania, I was a bit like, yeah, look, like, I have my own issues happening, but like in my mind, they're all like separate topics. So like I can work really well when I'm still like doing stuff with my lawyers or getting them to write something for me. So I can, like, I'm very good at like compartmentalizing, but this guy was just like, I don't know how to help you. And I'm like, I'm sorry, help me with what? And I'm like, I've lived 28 years without you. I don't think I need your help. But also, like, help me with what? Like, I've never asked for help. I just told you where I came from, and that doesn't automatically make you go like, oh, you poor girl. And when I met my current boyfriend, like that, I told him about that experience, and I was like, look, I don't want to be cuddled, which was great because he's not a big cuddler, which is sometimes not the best. But it was nice that I wasn't really put into this victim mindset
Yeah.
until some therapists did that, like some Western therapists did that to me, and I had to tell the therapist sometimes that I was like, that's not how I like seeing myself. So I think even so, bringing like seeing a therapist is so much like dating as well, right? Like you open up a lot of your vulnerabilities to them,
I could see that, yeah.
and like having this common ground or these differences with people. Like for me, it was just like I would never swipe right on somebody who remotely looked like me, came from a similar background, even if he was born here. For me, it was just like I have enough of the, I guess trauma, but I have like I left home when I was so young that I know like my reasons for leaving home were, yes, education, but it was also like I wanted something new and I wanted to explore the world bigger than me. And I'm always very fascinated by interculture and interracial friends and relationships as well. And what I find is like one of my close friends is Moldovan, and we have so much like cultural background in common. And she's like white, blue,
Moldovan.
her eyes blue, yeah, blue eyes, white, and I think she dyes her hair a bit blondish. But we have so much in common, and then a lot of Russians as well. And I was like, oh my God, guys, I feel like you could really pass off as a brown person. Like if it wasn't for you, like, and that was like, like that. All of that was so fascinating to me, but it also made me realize I would not date anybody who is from that culture as well, just on the patriarchal side as well.
Yeah, they
So
definitely
it
do
wasn't
have
so
that
much
too. Yeah.
exactly. So it wasn't like too much of like the attractive look scale, but it was also like the common, like I did not want that. And it would be, it would be statistically very hard to find somebody who had similar background and then was not practicing. Like you said, like a lot of Palestinians are practicing. And I wonder
Hmm.
if it is, I guess, being a minority more so, that it's a bit more, I want to say a bubble, like in Tanzania. Like I grew up in like a bubble because we were minorities. Like you're very like religious, or like when people move to the West and they're like, we must protect our ideas, we must protect our culture because it is being eradicated by the West. The West is the bad people, like blanket statement.
Yeah, exactly, those kinds of ideas for sure.
Mm.
Yeah, I
So,
mean,
so you dated this person, and you
yes,
didn't know
yes.
she was pregnant. So how long did you date them for?
Around not very long, a month, maybe two, probably around
Did
6 weeks, something like that.
did she know that you weren't a Muslim,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and she knew what you did?
She did. She know. So generally speaking, I don't mention the the YouTube channel until
Mm.
much later on in the process. Let's say it's a
3 years
lot.
later, we have a kid. Do we have a kid together?
It's
Okay,
a
cool.
it's I think it's a lot to handle, especially because I talk about my life and my experiences and a lot of other things on my channel, and so it would be like the ultimate kind of creeping to just look up the YouTube channel and find dozens and dozens of hours. So
I
yeah,
tell my boyfriend to, like, he's either in the room right now, or I'm like, if I need to make a reel, you need to put your headphones on, and then obviously the reel on Instagram. But I was like, I would prefer if you didn't listen to this, or I don't want you, because you don't know anything that you don't know about. But if it was like political, and I'm like, yeah, then you can come on.
yeah, which is I think it's totally fair. Yeah, yeah, it's totally fair to do that. So
So she had no idea that you were actually like actively
no, no, no.
interesting. So what happened?
So just so I can set the stage. So her background is not Palestinian, another Arab country, and I mentioned
Not hijab
no
wearing?
hijab, no, and
Um,
this is why it's going to get a little bit more interesting in a second. So I mentioned to her pretty early on, yeah, I'm not religious, I'm an atheist, and she didn't really comment on it whatsoever, and we really hit it off in the beginning. And I think what happened was, and I'll also mention, she drinks alcohol. She has male friends. Not judging her for that. I'm just saying this is. Uh, I think I just assumed, oh, she probably just has religious parents, and that's about it. That's the vibe I
hmm.
got. She lived alone. Her parents lived in the Middle East, and the other thing was we were sexually active as well.
Hmm.
So what happened was, at some point, I can't remember which date it was, we were playing. It's like a card game. It's like a relationship card game. Basically, there's all these prompts or themes, and
Mm-mm-mm-mm.
about different topics, different political topics, relationship topics, and you're
Better
both.
things. Is it
It
called better
it,
things?
it might
Better
have been. I
topics?
honestly can't remember. It's been a while. But yeah, so you both share your opinion on the subject, and one of the cards was about God, and I said something along the lines of, "Yeah, I don't believe that God is real, or at least not the one that people believe in, and I think it's pretty harmful." I said a bunch of things like that, and she said, "Yeah, I know you think that. I actually I actually believe in God, and I think it's really important. And I was worried about how you're not really religious." And I said, it's not that I'm not really religious; it's I'm an atheist, and I think it's actually harmful. And she said something like, I can't remember what she said to that specifically. What I remember is I asked her a question like, "So do you believe that there's like a heaven and hell?" And she said, "Yeah, I believe there's a heaven and a hell, and probably that I'm going to hell, and most people in the world are going to hell." And that's when, like, I remember the feeling of like what's that expression? That's when the needle dropped or whatever, and that's when my heart sank. Like, oh no, this person like I could tell from the way she said it too that she had a fundamental and like huge amount of guilt about her life and what she was doing, like how she was living her life. And it didn't last long much after that because I just realized we're incompatible in like this key area, and I think she really had a lot of issues with being sexually active and how she was living her life, and it didn't feel right to keep pursuing it.
I'm really glad that, you figured it out a lot sooner than later. But like,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
really interesting when she talked about everybody was going to hell, because I think I made a
Most of
reel
us are going
about
to
it.
hell. And I remember just kind of being astounded and thinking, I may have even asked her, like, is this how you view the world? Like that we're all sinners?
And
And
that seems so miserable.
I
Like, even
know,
in her
right?
mind, poor thing. Like, I mean, I almost feel sad for her, but if she is like an adult, like, no excuses. But also, like, I was thinking about it. I made a reel about it. Like, when I was young, I hell for me only existed for murderers, rapists, and like I could even excuse like a lot of the petty crimes, murders, rapists, abusive people. That's what hell existed in my head for me. And even then, I was like, but they'll pray for forgiveness and maybe they'll go to heaven, but it will be like centuries before they do that. And it was never about like, oh, other people are going to go to hell. They're all sinners. Like I never saw that lens through it. So while I didn't actually date early, I loved dancing. So the first time I removed my hijab was when I took salsa classes, and it was really hard doing the turns with the hijab on. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to take it off. It was the first time like my teacher was in that salsa class. I was like, oh, I've never seen your hair. And I'm like, we're never talking about this outside this class. And so I loved dancing. So I loved going to clubs, and I would never drink. And so that was the haram I would do. But even then, like I never saw that world and like, oh my God, you're going to go to hell. Even when I saw Muslims who were like, in my head, like I would know them from like Tanzania. They were in Malaysia and they were like, oh, you're in a club not wearing a hijab, holding a whiskey glass. And I was like, do you want some? And I'm like, I don't drink. So I don't know who was playing holier than thou there. But it was also like, it must be so miserable thinking the way
That's exactly what I thought when I
about
heard her say
people,
that.
because then you're like, okay, she could be an amazing person. But to me, it would just be like, am I at a stage where I want to invest this time in this
That's
person?
exactly
And
what
it's
I
also,
thought,
is
yeah.
it my role to influence this person?
I had all the same exact questions going through my mind. And
So how did you take on that conversation after?
I mean, I think we just kind of changed the topic, to be honest. We moved on to the next card in the game. But just for added information, she shared a lot of stuff with me about how she had a difficult relationship with her parents. Definitely an element of it of why are you living alone by yourself? Why aren't you living with us? I think they were supportive of her career, but they were asking her the questions around marriage. And I think there was a broken element of her relationship with her mother in terms of how she was living her life and expectations. And this is the thing that comes with it too. I think, especially for Muslim women, I think trying to navigate between what you think is right and what your parents expect of you, what your religion expects of you, and wanting to live your life and explore and experience things. And I could sense that there was this inner rift in her, caught between those two things, the same way I was caught, like the way I was talking about earlier.
How old is she?
I think 26.
Okay, so young, but still not as young. I'll just show you my dog. Yes, he has Zoomy, so all
By
the
the way, you probably
pillows
didn't
covered.
notice this, but at one point the cat I'm taking care of jumped on the table and the
Oh,
whole
him.
thing wobbled. But he didn't get caught on camera, unfortunately, for any of
Oh,
you cat lovers out there.
I have a really cute dog. Destroying my boyfriend's shoe. Actually, I'm like this parent who's like, my dog is really cute. There's not a cute dog. So, but yeah, sorry, I kind of wait. So she was 26. She was old enough, but not too young. I mean, I was 26 when I left Islam, but at the same time, like, I'm just thinking, like, a lot of women, like I said, it did take a longer journey, maybe, but for some women, depending on their experience, it could be very quick, especially when there's
Yeah, yeah.
violence involved as well, or a lot of restrictions. But also the lack of education and rights sometimes play in, like socioeconomic factors as well. If you're more educated, you may likely make more excuses for Islam, or you may go the other way.
Yeah, exactly.
So you chose another card, and then like, what did you tell her? Like, did you both decide that it was like,
Yeah, I think definitely from my end, it was a decision not to engage any further because one of the things I do, so as much as I talk about Islam and criticize it and share my concerns with it on my YouTube channel or on social media, I make an intentional effort not to, if I want to use the word proselytize, uh, about it in my day-to-day life unless I'm asked. So I have Muslim friends, I have people, I have Christian friends, I have people in my life who are religious, or maybe they're just curious about spirituality, and I don't bring those things up. I don't bring up a lot of the stuff that I bring up on my channel with them unless I'm asked. And with her, I had this temptation to just ask her questions like, why do you see the world that way? Like, how do you know for sure that hell is real? And like, and a whole bunch of questions like along those lines. And I stopped myself because I felt she's not asking for this right now. She's not asking for my opinion or my advice. And this is someone I barely know. This is someone I've dated a couple of times. It didn't feel right to do it, and it wasn't asked for. So I just didn't engage in it, and we never talked about it again.
Interesting. Because yeah, I think sometimes it's like it's better to cut your losses while
Cut your
you're ahead.
losses. Yeah.
Yeah. But how did you feel when you went? Because you said you went on a date with a couple of Muslims. So, and this was quite, well, not quite recent, but it was quite like after you are an ex-Muslim. How did that feel? Like, what were you? So, like, what were you thinking? But also, like, I'm guessing you weren't going in holding a lot of prejudice. You're like, I'll see where this goes or what happens.
Eventually.
Or
So I had the
yeah,
prejudices,
and
if you
then
remember, for a long time where I completely avoided it. But then I try to have a new philosophy of being open, meeting different people, different backgrounds,
how's
not
that
coming with
going?
assumptions. Well, that's one of those things with life is there's hits and misses and there's collateral damage, but then you learn a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think like to me, it is if somebody claims they're Muslim in this environment now, it's not because it's lack of information or exposure, and also it's not my job to educate them.
No,
And
it
that's
definitely isn't.
why, like, because it changes the power dynamic in a way that might not be sustainable. I know some people, have like some people would date Muslims or progressive Muslims or as non-Muslims, not ex-Muslims, like non-Muslims, and then they'll hope for that change, and sometimes that can work out really well. I think maybe because I came from like actively, very passionately leaving religion, like it wasn't just like a liberal parents, it was like a lot that I lost. I have more barriers and more like caution to that. Even like I have Muslim colleagues. I have, religious like Christian friends, but in Sweden nobody really practices. And a lot of my religious friends or most of my friends are non-religious. So even if they are like God believing, it's just like, yeah. I did have an incident, not incident, but like I did have a colleague at work who I really, really, really liked. And I'm like, I really want to be friends with her. So 2 weeks in after we were chatting, and I'm like, I have to ask you something very personal, just out of curiosity. 1 to 10, how religious are you? And she was like, -10. And I'm like, perfect, we'll be best friends forever. And she was like, why do you ask? And I'm like, look, this is who I am. And for me to be friends with you, I need to be myself.
Yeah,
And
that's the
I
most
don't want to
important
walk
thing.
around. I don't want to walk around eggshells. I don't want to offend you. I can be respectful to you as a colleague. We can be friends, but I feel like this is going to go a lot more than like just being friends. Like we're going to have a lot, like we're going to like create like a long-lasting friendship, I hope. Or maybe, oh my God, it would be so weird if she saw this and then she's like, oh my God, you creep. I didn't see you as anything else but a friend. But yeah, no, so that's what I asked her. And then another instance at work was, and this would have never happened to me, right? I was a work party and we were drinking, and this guy was not drinking, and because it's such an international company, and I just go talk to this, I just go into this room. They were playing Jenga, and I'm like, sorry, my dog needs food, so I'm messaging my boyfriend to get him food. But he was like, oh, where are you from? And I'm like, oh, Australia, Tanzania. I always say Australia / Tanzania because Australia was like my formative years, and Tanzania is less confusing when people go like, oh, but why aren't you white, or why don't you have an Australian accent?
Why
But
do people
actually,
even ask a question like that?
you know what? yeah, I don't know. But when I left Tanzania and I went to Malaysia and I told people I was from Tanzania, they were like, but you're not black. That was like the first time I'd actually thought about my, like, it's not like I didn't see it. And I know it sounds stupid, but it's like something that you don't actually, like, I'm brown. I'm brown, guys. I'm brown, like, every day. So when people went like, why am I not black? And I'm like, well, there are lots of people like me in Tanzania who aren't black. And yeah, so anyways, I was like Tanzania / Australian, and I'm like, oh, where are you from? And it's like, oh, I'm from Sweden, but I'm from Iran. And I'm like, oh, what part of Iran? And he's like, Mashhad. And I'm like, oh yeah, I've been to Mashhad. And that always goes like, oh, why have you been? And I'm like, I have religious parents, so been to Mashhad. And then he's like, yeah, I like the Islamic regime. And I was like, in Sweden, your parents fled the revolution, and I am here like drinking, and I'm like, I'm not even drunk because I'm so angry, right? Like, I'm angry, like that alcohol is like steaming away, and I'm like, tell me more. What do you like about it? They're like, they're protecting Iran, and I'm like, oh, how? By killing their own people? They're like, against the West, and I'm like, oh, really? You live in the West? What do you mean against the West?
That's always the most frustrating thing. The ones who continue living and benefiting from the life in the West, but then
And they're
disparage
like,
it.
America is going to attack, blah, blah. What happens if America attacks? Who's going to protect the country? And I'm like, have you ever thought about the fact that America might not attack if Iran did not incite stuff? Or how about, only because America has a possibility to attack, it's not like they go around dropping bombs everywhere. I mean, some people would argue they do. But it was just like, that was his argument based on, and he's like, oh, my parent, and then I'm like, look, I have to go. And every time I tried exiting the conversation, sorry, I don't know if that hit my mic. But every time I tried exiting the conversation, he was like, oh, my parents would probably agree with you. And I'm like, no shit, they sound like they fled the Islamic regime, and here you are, their son, their proud 26-year-old something, like, I like this. So he's not young, he's not 18, he's not 21. And I'm just like, And now every time I see him, I don't go to the office much, but every time I see him, I'm like, hey, let's go somewhere else.
It's astounding how often those kinds of things come up. What happens to me, not specifically that subject, but what happens is I'll just be hanging out with someone who's Muslim or from a Muslim background, and then it really is the case that they just drop something and like, whoa, where did that come from? I remember there was someone I played soccer with for years. So he wasn't a close friend, but I knew him really well. And he just said one day, I don't know how it came up, but there's like a pride parade in Toronto where I live. And he said, I don't care what they do in their homes, but why do they have to go around and flaunt it? Like, why do they have to be always in our face about it?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Be so gay.
Yeah, why do they
what
have
are
to?
they
Yeah,
flaunting?
exactly.
I mean, I would admit that Pride Parade has like a lot of penises and dildos going around, and I'm like, if you have an issue with that, just stay at home when the Pride Parade's happening. But the parade is more than just like there's dildos. I mean,
No.
the whole, also Pride Parade is also about being in your face as well. It is about
It's an important component of it. Yeah,
exactly. It is about being in your face, like we exist. But also at the same time, I'm just like, what exactly do you oppose? Or like, it's so strange to me that like you live in, like, I mean, I guess it's not strange to any, like, all ex-Muslims probably hold, or a lot of Muslims as well, maybe, like, you live in the West and then you hate the West. I was talking to my brother about it, and he's like, oh, not all countries are perfect, like the UK is not that great. And I'm like, look, the problems that we have in Tanzania with like let's say my arrest, or like the corruption, it's far much less in the West. I mean, we have other problems.
We can't
like
paint it with the same brush like that.
Oh my God, what just reminded me? I went to the UK to see my sister, and we were living in a hotel in Kensington. So I don't know how much of the UK but Kensington is quite nice and poshish. It wasn't the best hotel, but it was like, I was thinking about not taking her to Golders Green, where there are a lot of Jews, just in case, because they wear hijab, and not taking myself to East London, where, I guess even they would not like the Muslims there, because they're now very liberal. Like, they still wear a hijab, but they're very open-minded, or they're getting there. They're open to being challenged, and they know their limitations, where they're like, I'm not ready yet. And I'm like, okay, I won't push, like, but if you want to. So I quite like hanging out with my siblings, because I feel like we have some interesting conversations. But in Kensington, we were waiting for a bus, and somebody was driving by and just went like, Muslim,
And showed the
flipped
finger.
their finger. And then I didn't say anything about it. I thought my sister didn't hear it. I was like, oh, it was just my head. Maybe they said something else. I don't even know if it was a finger, it was a hand out. And I'm like, and then she saw it and she heard, and she's like, did you see that? Did you hear that? And I'm like, okay, it's not just me. And I was like, oh my God. Like, it's just so, like, I was just beyond words. I was like, oh. And my sister was like, oh, I'm so glad we left the UK. Like, she called me and said, she's like, oh my God, let's see what's happening in the UK. I'm so glad we left it. I'm like, yeah, both sides are crazy. And I'm like, did you see the Muslims stabbing the towers? And she's like, no, I only see the far right. And I'm like, yeah, well, you have crazies on both sides. And they're like, yeah, that makes sense. And it was just, I don't know what to say about it. But I think that's bringing us kind of to an end, to a very tangent related. I think we should do this a lot more. Maybe we should do a next one on your channel.
Yes, well, I did have that idea that is actually related to our conversation. That
do you want to split this in half and then we can go?
Maybe that would be a good idea. We can discuss.
Well, thank you so much for coming here. This is definitely really, really fun. I think we should do other
Long
topics
overdue.
like this.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think we should do other topics. I think we can do like smaller 15 minutes, like reactions.
Yeah, for sure.
Because that dating one was really nice.
It
But
was
thank
wild.
you so much. This was fun. It was really interesting to hear your perspective on things and how similar but also opposite we are.
Yeah, it was really interesting. Different journeys, but same experiences.
Like, yeah.